have to respect your actors. When I directed Star Trek 4, I got a magnificent performance out of Bill because I respected him so much.
And when I directed Star Trek 5, I got a magnificent performance out of me because I respected me so much.
All right, hello. Welcome back to another Classic Comics Trek Talk, where I take a look at one of the episodes of the original Star Trek series, both the episode and the behind-the-scenes making of it. This week, taking a look at the Omega Glory. And this is one of the last episodes of the second season. So next week I'll be doing Assignment Earth, and that'll do it for season 2. Now, this episode, I think it's one of the ones that there's more kind of I don't know, disagreement about it, maybe as far as the quality of the episode, because it does have a certain, I think, cheese factor to it. And I think some people are not so crazy about it, whereas others maybe just like it fine. This is from an NBC press release issued February 6th, 1968. Captain Kirk and part of his crew are exposed to a deadly disease when they board the starship Exeter, whose crew died under mysterious circumstances in the Omega Glory on NBC's Star Trek Colorcast Friday, March 1st. The Exeter's log reveals its crew died of a virus they picked up on the planet Omega 4. The only surviving member is Captain Tracy, who remained behind and became immunized. Traveling to Omega 4, Kirk ascertains Tracy's real motive for remaining. He then realizes there is no alternative but to convince Cloud William, leader of Omega's freedom-loving faction, that Tracy is their enemy. Tracy, stranded on the planet, has sided with the more civilized of the two warring factions. He is seemingly unaffected by the loss of his command and by the death of his crew, and is obsessed with his belief that something in the atmosphere of Omega 4 can induce near immortality in humans. The theme examines how a worthwhile cause helps nobody if its original intent is forgotten. In addition to the theme, there is a message: liberty and justice for all, including our enemies. All right. So this episode was written by Gene Roddenberry and directed by Vincent McAveety. The Omega Gloria spent more than 4 decades at the center of a debate. Was it one of Star Trek's best or worst? Glory is a paradox. It is marred by a few awkward moments seeming to dominate one's overall opinion of the material. Yet this is a better than average production. It benefits from inspired direction, energized and passionate performances, especially from William Shatner and Morgan Woodward, vigorous and realistic fight sequences between Kirk and Cloud William, and then even more intense and gritty between Kirk and Tracy, and some fascinating concepts: a virus that reduces a human being to a few pounds of crystallized remains, Tracy's belief that he has found the fountain of youth, an accusation that Spock is Lucifer, and finally the fantastic concept that there could be another United States on another Earth with another Thomas Jefferson who penned another Declaration of Independence. But with all these pluses, one can't help but squirm a bit when the tattered flag of the United States is paraded across our screens to the accompaniment of the Star-Spangled Banner. For many, it all seemed rather self-glorifying for this US-made show. And for the detractors, because of this, the whole point of the episode is lost. Dorothy Fontana recalled, someone got nasty about it one time, saying, oh, he's just saying that the United States was the greatest country ever. And I said, no, it's about the Declaration of Independence. It's about we the people. It's about the words, and the expression of ideas and ideals is what he was really talking about, because Gene had both reverence for the Constitution and the Declaration. And he really did. I guess as an old cop and an old Navy guy, he had the reverence for the flag and for the institution, but he acknowledged they could be wrong. He opposed the Vietnam War, for example, yet he had reverence for the words and the Declaration of Independence, and he really, really revered Thomas Jefferson as a thinker and a writer. And there lies the blemish on this old glory, a misunderstanding of intent, a failure on the part of the writer and the producer and director to better communicate the intent of the material. Political agendas aside, lack of subtlety notwithstanding, miscommunication forgiven, glory deserves reassessment by those who have damned it over the years. This would most certainly be a quality endeavor in nearly every regard. All right. And yeah, as I kind of said earlier, I think it's, I don't think anyone's ever going to say this is one of Star Trek's greatest episodes. And the author seems to be kind of taking the side and saying, hey, this isn't as bad as everyone thinks it is. And maybe they're right. Maybe I just take that position a little too easily. But I've never been a huge fan of this episode, honestly, for a couple of different reasons. And it's not so much even the absurdity of the whole parallel world thing, but I'll get into that as we go through the episode here. And as always, I'll be reading from Mark Cushman's These Are the Voyages for behind the scenes and making of the episode information. And if I didn't mention it earlier, this is episode 54 in production order, as I am going by production order, not by broadcast order. All right, so the Enterprise is approaching Omega 4, and they discover the USS Exeter in orbit over the planet. Now, Kirk notes that the Exeter was in this area 6 months earlier, but it shouldn't still be here. And I don't know if you can tell, but you can kind of see it right there. And Sulu says that the vessel seems to have no damage, but it isn't responding to hails. So Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Lieutenant Galloway, who I'm sure is going to be just fine, well, they beam over to investigate. And there they find that the Exeter's engineering section is completely abandoned, and they find a uniform that contains what appears to be some sort of salt or crystallized residue, as if a crewman was wearing it when something strange happened to them. And again, written by Gene Roddenberry, directed by Vincent McAvity. So Spock and Galloway search the ship, and they can find no evidence of the crew, only more empty uniforms. And also, all of the shuttlecraft are still on board. And they mention in here specifically, Galloway says that all 4 shuttlecraft are still here. And so I guess maybe the official complement for one of these Constitution-class ships is supposed to be 4 shuttlecraft. I had wondered about that at times. Just how many shuttles do they have? Unlike, say, the USS Voyager, which seemed to have, I don't know, like an infinite supply of shuttles. Okay, so they go to the bridge, and there they find more empty uniforms. Now, McCoy realizes that these piles of salt, or whatever they are, in the uniforms are actually the remains of the crew. Noting that if you take away all the moisture, all the water in our bodies, this is basically what's left, a few pounds of basic chemical salts. Now, Spock is able to access the ship's logs, and they play a log entry from the Exeter's chief medical officer. At least I guess that they call him the chief surgeon, which is interesting because I don't think they ever really call McCoy the chief surgeon. They always call him the chief medical officer, but whatever. And the Exeter's chief surgeon warns that anyone who has come on board the Exeter and sees this message is doomed, and they shouldn't return to their own ship. He advises anyone who sees this message to beam down to the planet immediately before they die. So, and then they, of course, see the man's uniform on the floor of the bridge. Again, he created this log entry just before he himself died and turned into a pile of salts. So Kirk, sensibly enough, orders everyone to beam down to Omega 4 immediately. So they beam down to this village, And then they stumble across what appears to be a beheading, an execution of some kind. But then the natives spot Kirk and the others. They advance on the landing party, but before an attack can take place, the locals are interrupted by Captain Ron Tracy, the captain of the Exeter, the Exeter. Now, Tracy is pleased that someone came looking for the Exeter, but says that he's sorry it had to be Kirk. Then he tells the local chieftain to lock up the quote-unquote savages, a man and a woman. The chief questions this, noting that Kirk and the others have fireboxes, as he calls them. But Tracy tells him to do it anyway. Now, according to Tracy, the man about to be executed and the woman with him are Yangs, members of a primitive tribal culture that inhabits the hills surrounding the village. He says that the Yangs are completely savage, unable to even speak, and they will kill pretty much anything that moves. At least that's according to him. And Spock observes that, the locals seem to know what phasers are. This is clearly a pre-warp civilization, and, he shouldn't have paraded his phaser around in front of them. Tracy explains that when the Exeter arrived, their scanners indicated that the planet's environment was completely harmless. They beamed down and met the villagers, or the Combs, as they're called, and they arranged for the Exeter's personnel to conduct a planetary survey. But when the rest of the landing party beamed back up to the ship, they began dying. They had brought some sort of plague back to the ship, and eventually the entire crew died. Tracy says that he was spared because he stayed down on the planet, but he'd been infected with the same illness that killed his crew, and he would likely die if he left the planet. Then he tells Kirk and the others that they are infected as well, and they'll have to stay on the planet for the rest of their lives, because if they leave, they'll die just like his crew did. He says that there is some sort of natural immunization factor in the environment of the planet that is keeping him alive. And presumably all the villagers are infected as well. Everyone's carrying this disease, but again, they're all, for some reason, not dying from it. Now, Kirk, later, he and McCoy are talking, and Kirk is concerned, as it seems pretty clear that Tracy has been tampering with the natural development of the culture on this planet. And of course, Tracy has asked McCoy to investigate this and try to find and isolate the immunization, whatever it is in the environment that's causing the immunization. Hopefully they can isolate it and create a cure. And they have some equipment beamed down from the Enterprise for McCoy to do this. Now, then Spock arrives with Galloway, who has been injured in a Yang ambush. Spock and Galloway had done some scouting in the hills around the village, and they were ambushed by several Yangs. They were able to fight them off and escape. Fortunately, they were able to do it without firing their phasers. Then he reveals that the Yangs seem to be massing in the hills surrounding the village in the thousands, likely preparing for some sort of large attack on the village. Then he shows Kirk some phaser power packs, likely Captain Tracy's, which were found among the remains of hundreds of dead Yangs. Spock speculates that there had been a previous attack on the village before, and Tracy drove them off using his phaser. Again, this is a clear violation of the Prime Directive, and he says that Kirk must take action to hold Tracy accountable, or by Starfleet laws, he'll be seen as effectively a collaborator. Now, McCoy argues that under the circumstances, there was little else that Tracy could have done. What was he supposed to do? Just stand back and let the Yangs come into this village and massacre everybody? But Spock insists that at the very least, Kirk must confront Tracy and confiscate his phaser. Now, here's where I kind of have an issue or one of the issues I have with this episode, is that there's a lot of strange plot convenience at work here. And multiple times in this episode, just as they're about to do something or take some sort of action that Tracy wouldn't like, Tracy suddenly appears in the doorway with a phaser. It's literally as if every time they're having a conversation, he's just standing outside the doorway and waiting for his cue to come in, which obviously as an actor he is, but that's how it feels. So they're discussing this, and then boom, Tracy appears in the doorway with a phaser. And and because Kirk is about to call Starfleet with his communicator, right? So he's like, gets out his communicator, is about to make a call. Boom, Tracy's there in the doorway with the phaser saying, don't contact anybody. Now Galloway, seeing this, tries to pull his phaser, and then Tracy disintegrates him. Just right there on the spot. Doesn't stun him, but he disintegrates him. So their phasers and communicators are confiscated, and Tracy calls the Enterprise, telling them that Kirk and the others are unconscious, and they have beamed down too late to survive the plague that killed the Exeter's crew, and they seem to be dying. Then Kirk tries to warn Sulu of what's happening, but they knock him unconscious, and then Tracy tells Sulu that Kirk is delirious from fever and that he will keep them informed as to the status of the crew and what's happening. Now, later, so Kirk is tied up and there's a guard on him. Well, he trips the guard and then tries to overpower the guard. And I got these a little out of order, unfortunately. But as he's trying to overpower the guard, boom, Tracy's at the door with a phaser going, don't do that, Jim. Knock that off. So the second time, he tells the guard to step outside. Then he explains to Kirk that no one on this planet ever gets sick. And then he tells Kirk that the guard is over 462 years old and his father is well over 1,000. He tells Kirk that this immunizing agent on the planet doesn't just protect them from the plague that killed the Exeter's crew, but it actually stops them from aging. In other words, it is almost a veritable fountain of youth. And he's not having McCoy isolate the immunizing factors so he can cure this disease. He wants to isolate it so he can create basically an immortality serum. And of course, then they can sell it to the Federation and make a fortune. And he's willing to cut Kirk in on the action, give him a piece of the action, you might say, if he is willing to cooperate. Now, Kirk managed to untie his hands. Then he attacks Tracy, and they fight, but Tracy makes pretty short work of him. He kicks his ass pretty easily. When you've seen Kirk fight Klingons and Gorns and, get through all these other foes, but then he goes up against this one middle-aged guy, and this guy just beats the crap out of him. So then Tracy takes Kirk to the village prison, where he's placed in a cell with the Yangs. Now, the male Yang attacks Kirk, who tries to fight him off. As they struggle, Spock manages to nerve pinch the female. And when the male sees her collapse, he stops attacking to go take care of her. And hello, J Rocker. Thanks for stopping by, sir. Good to see you. Thank you for being here. Now, Spock mentions, or where was I here? Okay, yeah. So Spock starts working on the bars in the window of his cell and gets the bars loose. And remember, Spock is stronger than a human, so I think it's reasonable that he could do that. And he advises Kirk to try it, but of course Kirk says, I can't. If I try to work on the window, this guy will be all over me. Then Spock mentions that Tracy, oh, hey, Aladega, good to see you, sir. Thank you for stopping by. Good to see you, as always. So Spock mentions that Tracy had told them there were some ruins on this planet that seemed to be from a previous civilization. And Spock speculates that there was some kind of devastating war of some kind that wiped those previous cultures out. Now, Kirk urges Spock to keep working on the bars in his window, saying that this may be the only way they can regain their freedom. When Kirk says this, the male Yang perks up and he says, and remember, supposedly they can't talk, but he speaks saying that freedom is a holy word, and warns Kirk not to speak it. Kirk then explains that it's an important word for them as well. The Yang is suspicious since he was friends with the Combs, but Kirk notes that he's been thrown in jail along with them. So they cooperate and get the bars on their window loose. But then the male Yang clubs Kirk over the head and knocks him out. And while he is unconscious, the Yangs escape. Now, hours later, and he must have really clocked Kirk pretty hard because when Kirk wakes up, he says, how long have I been out? And Spock's like 7.5 hours. I mean, if you knock someone out for that length, I think you pretty much would have killed them. But Spock and Kirk, they are eventually able to escape. And then they go to find McCoy, who is in a lab working to find the cure or the serum. So they overpower the guard. Now, their communicators have been confiscated, so Spock tries to, kind of jury rig a communications device from some of the equipment, the medical equipment they have. Meanwhile, McCoy tells Kirk that his research indicates that there was a devastating biological war on this planet in the past, and this plague that killed the Exeter's crew is likely a leftover of the biological weapons used in that war. He also says that the planet and the people have developed powerful natural antibodies or resistance to these various manufactured diseases in order to survive. Now, Kirk mentions that Tracy's, believes that these natives are nearly immortal and that the planet is basically a kind of fountain of youth. McCoy dismisses this, saying that the people on this planet have long lifespans because they just evolved that way. And if they hadn't, they would have died out a long time ago. He also says that the immunization factor should have already taken effect within a few hours of them coming down, and that they should be able to safely leave the planet now without spreading the plague to anyone else or without dying. In other words, they're safe to leave now, and this thing's not going to kill them because they've been immunized by it just by being on the planet. Now, Spock is about to call the Enterprise and contact them and let them know what's going on when Tracy appears in the door with a phaser again and phasers the equipment. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me with this? All right, so Tracy demands to know if Kirk freed the Yang earlier, saying that male Yang must have warned the others. He says that when they went out to fight them, they were ambushed, and says that they drained 4 phasers, killing these Yangs. They killed thousands of them. Now, Kirk and McCoy are looking after Spock. McCoy says that Spock should survive, but he needs, more extensive care. Now, Tracy says, of course, they can't leave the planet without spreading the plague to the ship, the Enterprise. And then Kirk and McCoy reveal that there is no special element in this environment that stops disease or keeps people young. The people on the planet have simply evolved that way. In other words, there's no fountain of youth, there's no serum. And all the scheming and all this murdering that Tracy has done has been for nothing. Tracy doesn't like hearing that, of course. So he takes Kirk outside and he demands that Kirk order the Enterprise to send down more phasers, since the Yangs are regrouping and will likely attack the village soon. and Tracy's phaser is almost empty. So Kirk calls the Enterprise and requests the phasers, but Sulu says that he knows they can't fulfill that request without some kind of verification of the threat. Now, Tracy, of course, won't let Kirk elaborate, and so Kirk tells him to stand by, and Kirk's like, oh, well, I guess no phasers. Then he gets the jump on Tracy, and this was another thing I found kind of amusing. So he gets away from Tracy and is running, and he comes running around this corner, and and he's kind of going this way, and then he clearly diverts. He clearly kind of, and then swerves, comes back this way, clearly just so he can jump over this little wall here, which he could just as easily have run around. Which, hey, why not? No harm in it, but still, it's kind of funny. It's like, can you just run around it? So Tracy is chasing after him. He gets the jump on Kirk, but his phaser is now empty. So then he grabs an axe and is going to attack Kirk. They get into a bit of a brawl. And then while they're fighting, they're interrupted by the Yangs, who have won the battle and taken the village. Now, later, as the Yangs are celebrating their victory, Spock and McCoy are brought to join Kirk and Tracy as prisoners of the Yangs. Kirk then speculates that the Yang's culture is very much what his ancestors would have been like if they had lost a world war in the past. And Spock agrees, speculating that this planet evolved culture similar to Earth's past, but their world was devastated by a third world war and left in ruins, with the Combs, or communists, as the victors, more or less, while the Yangs, or Yankees, were driven into the wilderness to live like an Aboriginal culture. And then, as if to confirm their theory, some Yangs enter bearing the Stars and Stripes and American flag. The male Yang states that his name is Cloud William, and he is a chief and a son of chiefs. He says that what was once theirs was taken, but is now theirs again. He then begins reciting some strange words, and Kirk realizes that he's reciting a kind of garbled version of the Pledge of Allegiance. Then he begins reciting it as well. And this shocks the Yangs because no one outside their tribe should know this stuff. And he is speaking holy words that only they should know. He explains that he comes from a tribe much like the Yangs. When they ask where he's from, he tells them he is from one of those lights in the sky. They ask if he was cast out, and that's why he's here on their planet. And then Tracy says that yes, he was cast out, and he is a servant of the evil one and trying to trick him. Then he points out Spock and says, look at your holy books and see what the evil one looks like. So they look at their Bible. Yes, they have a Bible too, just by coincidence. And sure enough, there's an image of Lucifer, or the devil. And what do you know? He looks just like Spock. So then Tracy tells them that if they don't believe him, check Spock's heartbeat, because he has no heart. And of course, he doesn't have a heartbeat the way a human does, because his heart is in a different spot, but that escapes the Yangs, of course. So Claude William checks him, and sure enough, he has no heartbeat. McCoy tries to explain that his body is just different, but the Yangs aren't listening to this. So they decide that clearly one of them, Kirk or Tracy, is lying. And so they decide on a test. They produce a document that they say is their holiest of holies, and that the evil one would be unable to recite it. He will begin, and then they will finish what he was saying. If they can't, they'll be judged evil and, killed, I guess. They don't specify. So he begins speaking the words, but they seem like gibberish, and Kirk can't really figure out what he's saying. So Tracy says that Kirk can't recite the words because he's evil. It suggests they kill him and his servant Spock as well. So they put a knife to Spock's throat. And I always love this expression Spock has. Then Kirk suggests that they allow a trial by combat between Kirk and Tracy, because, after all, good is stronger than evil, and evil cannot triumph over good. And the Yangs agree to this. So they bind their hands together and then set out a knife, and they're going to fight. And of course, whoever can get the knife first will win, presumably. So cue the fighting music. And as Kirk and Tracy are fighting, Spock uses his mental abilities to plant a suggestion into the mind of a female Yang. And he gets her to pick up a communicator, and she brings it over to Spock. So Kirk and Tracy are fighting. She brings the communicator to Spock and opens it. Presumably, this activates it and emits a signal, which the Enterprise can detect. Kirk manages to get the knife and defeat Tracy. Cloud William urges Kirk to kill him, but Kirk refuses. Then Sulu and a pair of red shirts beam in. So Kirk has them free Spock and McCoy while he speaks to Cloud William, who says that they must be gods. Kirk denies being a god and then reveals that the document William was reciting earlier was the Declaration of Independence. And then he recites the words, saying, these words have been spoken on many planets by many cultures, but never with quite the pride and eloquence stated here. We, the people. And he tells them that these words aren't just for chieftains, but are meant for all men. They must apply to all men, or they mean nothing, even the combs. And he tells them that through the centuries they have forgotten the original meaning of the words and that they must apply them to everyone. William says that he doesn't really understand all this, but says, if you say so, then we'll do it. It seems like kind of shaky confirmation, but okay. So then Spock says that while Tracy is clearly guilty, he notes that what they have done, particularly Kirk has done, also clearly qualifies as violation of the Prime Directive in a multitude of ways. But Kirk, as is his way, kind of dismisses this, saying that he merely showed them what the meaning of the words they've been fighting for really is. You see, Spock, it's okay if I do it. And then with one more glance at Old Glory, the episode ends there. And yeah, I give this one a C+. I've just, like I said, I've just never been that crazy about this one. But, results may vary. I'm sure there are some who think this is a pretty good episode. All right. Now, well, first, let me see here. Okay. All right. So, as noted, this was written by Gene Roddenberry. Let me take a drink of water right quick here. Hold on. All right. So, Gene Roddenberry's story outline and first draft for the Omega Glory were written way back in 1965 as one of 3 candidates for Star Trek's second pilot, alongside Where No Man Has Gone Before and Mud's Women. Obviously, Where No Man Has Gone Before was the one that got chosen, and then Mud's Women was done shortly after that. It was one of the first 3 or 4 episodes. Glory, however, got passed over, and it would be the first of many times that this story would be rejected. Quote, Gene Roddenberry's script wasn't very good, said Herb Solow in his and Robert Justman's book, Inside Star Trek, The Real Story. It was unnecessary to point it out to him. He was the first to recognize it. Roddenberry would have disagreed, however. He liked his concept of a parallel world where the United States and Communist China actually fought, the war that he hoped would be avoided on our planet. He liked the idea of a modern day search for the fountain of youth, and he liked the science fiction flavoring. The idea of a disease, a leftover of a war that could rob the human body of water and reduce a person to a few pounds of salts. Roddenberry's script had a lot going for it, but no one at Desilu or NBC seemed very excited by it. Gene Coon was handed the script before the end of Star Trek's first season. He too was reluctant to take it on and chose to write a couple of scripts of his own instead, The Devil in the Dark and Errand of Mercy, to fill slots needed on the production roster in the second season when Glory and another script based on one of Gene Roddenberry's ideas, Portrait in Black and White, also did not meet network approval. And I've talked about that one before, and if you don't remember, Portrait in Black and White would have been an episode where, again, it's like a parallel Earth story where they would go to a planet that basically was, I think, in the Civil War, but the roles of black people and white people would be reversed, where the black people would be the slave owners and the white people would be the slaves. Surprisingly, the networks at the time didn't like that one. When the second season arrived, Roddenberry again pushed to get the Omega Glory back into development and agreed to hand it over to Lester and Tina Pine, a husband and wife freelancing team. Les, 49, was a frequent writer for many shows, including Peter Gunn and Ben Casey. In 1965, he began collaborating with his wife Tina, who had previously been an actress. The Pines had recently collaborated on scripts for I Spy and The Big Valley. And it's when I was reading this, it occurred to me, I was curious because I wondered if, because of course, when they did the JJ reboot, they got Chris Pine to be Captain Kirk. And of course, he is the son of Robert Pine, an actor who, main thing I know him from is he was on Chips. But it occurred to me that this guy was probably the right age that he could be their son. Robert Pine could have. So was it possible that Chris Pine was the grandson of Les and Tina Pine? Well, I checked and no, he's not. They're not related, at least not that I could find. Robert Pine's parents had different names. It would have been cool if they were, though. So of the Pines version, Dorothy Fontana, on October 4th, 1967, writing to Coon's replacement, John Meredith Lucas, stated, quote, "As I have already said to both you and Gene, this so-called script is a catastrophe beyond any we have ever had before. And I include Portrait in Black and White in that." The notorious Portrait in Black and White was in many ways another Omega Glory. It too was a Gene Roddenberry story, although the script was written by Barry Trivers, who had been handed the assignment after writing The Conscience of the King. And it too was a parallel Earth story. I already talked about that, so I'll skip that part. The message-heavy Black and White failed to win supporters at the Star Trek productions offices at Desilu and at NBC. Stan Robertson, in particular, disapproved of the premise, writing to Roddenberry on August 26, 1966, that the story was unacceptable and didn't fit into the Star Trek concept. I don't know about that. Why doesn't it fit? I don't think that was the real reason. Both Herb Solow and Robert Justman stated that Roddenberry was, quote, angered by the rejection, and the turning down of the racially charged script, quote, helped to sour his relationship with the NBC program executives. And now Dorothy Fontana was telling Roddenberry via a memo that the Pines version of the Omega Glory was actually even worse. Fontana's criticism continued, quote, rather than devote 25 pages of memo to what is wrong with this, since everything is wrong with it, I just recommend that we pay off the Pines and do not ask them to do any revision on a script that is already unsalvageable. The Pines were dismissed. Roddenberry buckled down to work on a new version of the Omega Glory. John Meredith Lucas, looking out for Star Trek, stayed in the office and wrote to Mary Dorfman at the Writers Guild of America. He told her, quote, The Omega Glory was written by Gene Roddenberry in 1965, but shelved because of the high production costs. I don't think that was really the reason. This year it was assigned to Tina and Les Pine for a rewrite, which they delivered on September 19th. The rewritten script did not in any way meet our needs and was immediately shelved. Gene Roddenberry then returned to his original script and rewrote it for our final shooting script. As the fruits of Gene Roddenberry's labors were distributed to Lucas, Justman, and Fontana, the staff was uncharacteristically silent. The barrage of memos normally prompted by the arrival of a new screenplay at the Star Trek offices did not come. The writer of this latest script, after all, was their boss. And I think at this point, because again, they at this point only needed like one more script. And they, as far as they knew at this point, they were likely being canceled. So this was likely going to be the final episode of Star Trek. At least they thought at the time. And I think at that point, a lot of them were just like, whatever. He's obviously, we need a script. He's got this one here. We don't like it, but what else are we going to do? What are we going to do? Go out and hire another writer to write another script? And, because that inevitably that takes weeks, if not months, and we don't have that kind of time. And, our only other option is to go with some other script that's probably even less suitable. So I think it was that Roddenberry just kind of outlasted everybody more than anything. It took Robert Justman 30 years to break the silence, finally saying, quote, "I wrote a memo in which my comments were devastating. However, not wanting to hurt his feelings, I tore it up and made a few suggestions to him in person. He took the advice, but as anyone who has seen the episode knows, it didn't do any good." The similarities between, let's see. Okay, yeah. So actually, now it mentions here that the opening of the story, this whole setup where they beam onto an empty ship and find a bunch of empty uniforms. So this appears to be an idea that was actually lifted from, I don't know if it was a full script. I think it was just a story treatment that was actually credited to William Shatner. That was titled Web of Death and was submitted on April 29th, 1966. And it has the basic setup. They go to on a mission to find the whereabouts of a missing Federation ship, and they find a ship which in the story is called the USS Momentous. And it doesn't answer hails, but seems to be undamaged, so they beam over and they find the ship empty, but a bunch of empty uniforms. And of course, it's the setup for what's going to happen in the episode. And it seems like Roddenberry lifted this idea, or borrowed, I guess would be the charitable way to say it, in order to be the sort of initial setup or initial hook for his rewrite. Okay, so eventually this thing was approved for shooting. Again, I think kind of begrudgingly, but because they had no better options, and this, it looked at the time, was likely going to be the final episode they were going to shoot anyway. So they was like, oh, to hell with it. And Roddenberry was rewriting it even as they were shooting. So new pages were coming into the set daily. All right, now Vincent McAveety, as mentioned before, directed this. This was his 5th episode of Star Trek. So there are only a couple of real notable guest stars. There's Morgan Woodward here. Woodward was 42. Woodward said Omega Glory was simply a story about a good man gone bad, perhaps because of some ego-induced insanity. Captain Tracy didn't just become a starship captain by being a jerk or a bad guy. It was just a good man gone awry. That's the way I tried to play him. Yeah, at the very least, I mean, Tracy is one of the most outright, just like plain evil villains in a Star Trek episode. And the fact that he's a starship captain, it's kind of surprising. You know, like one of the issues they had with Harlan Ellison's original script for City on the Edge of Forever is because it had a member of the Enterprise, you know, an officer on the Enterprise who was basically a drug dealer. And, you know, it was felt like, oh no, we don't want our crew to be like that. We want them to be these more sort of idealized people. And yet then Roddenberry turns around and writes this script where honestly, this Starship captain is one of the worst individuals you see in any episode of this show. I mean, he is a complete POS. He is just outright awful. Director McAvity said that Morgan Woodward was the one that I used mostly in various shows because he was such an interesting character. He gave such dimension to his characters. He could play crazy and he could play very nice. And by this meaning give it dimension, I'm saying you could get elements of both at the same time, good and bad. Now, of course, this isn't the first Star Trek episode for Woodward. He appeared in Dagger of the Mind in the first season, playing Simon Van Gelder, which was also directed by McAvity, by the way. The two men knew one another from working repeatedly on Gunsmoke, and by the time Gunsmoke left the air in 1975, Woodward actually held the record for the most guest appearances on Gunsmoke, appearing in 19 episodes. And I'm assuming playing a different character in every single one. While this episode was being filmed, Woodward was actually on the big screen, appearing in the film Cool Hand Luke alongside Paul Newman. Now, Roy Jensen, who played Cloud William, let me find a good image of him. It's good enough. He was 40 years old. Now, he began his career as a stuntman and primarily working with Robert Mitchum. And then he landed over 200 jobs as an actor between 1951 and 1999, usually playing bad guys. And they give a long list of all the bad guys he's played, but you know his roles often had names like bully, bruiser, gunman, assassin, thug, that sort of thing. Let's see. He was the guy, actually, he was in Chinatown, and in Chinatown, he's the guy that cuts Jack Nicholson's nose with the knife, with the switchblade. That was him. Jensen said, quote, "It was kind of a thrill to do Star Trek because I hadn't done any of those. I had done mostly Westerns. I think I got the part because I looked good in a bearskin and I could mumble my lines." Now, the female Yang, Syrah, who we also see here, she was new to TV and appeared mostly in minor roles. Next to Star Trek, her most notable role was a female lead in a 1972 horror exploitation film called Enter the Devil. Ed McReady played the doomed medical officer on the Exeter. Let me see, get back there. There he is. He had previously appeared in Miri, playing the mutant creature, you know, the mutant boy they meet. And he also appeared just a couple of episodes earlier in Patterns of Force, playing a Yahtzee. Now, David Ross returned playing Lieutenant Galloway. I don't know if I have a really good image of him. There, you kind of see him there. He appeared in Miri. He also appeared in Return of the Archons, A Taste of Armageddon, and in The City on the Edge of Forever. He has his biggest role here with dialogue and a death scene. So previously he'd just been like a red shirt in the background who gets killed, I guess. But it was not the end of the road for Ross or the character of Galloway, because Galloway, despite being killed, he would get phasered and disintegrated, but somehow Galloway would return in Turnabout Intruder and appear again. And Ross would appear also in Day of the Dove, playing another character named Lieutenant Johnson. And then Morgan Farley played, let me see. It's back here. So late in the episode, they introduced this elderly Yang, sort of, I don't know what you call him. There he is. Anyway, the actor that played him, Morgan Farley, he also appeared in Return of the Archons. He was one of the village elders in that episode. Now, curiously, I have to say, although they talk about the diversity that Star Trek promoted, yet oddly, this book never talks about any of the Asian actors in this episode. Let me jump to the end here. Okay, so Lloyd Keno, I believe that's the guy that plays the comb sort of chieftain. And that is this guy here. Let me see if I find a better image of him. There, you kind of see him standing, and he's like the only comb that has any lines. But curiously, this book never mentions him or says anything about him, which I found kind of odd. Okay, now, usually when I talk about the filming of the episode, I'll talk about interesting things that happened on the set. I'll talk about the interactions between, the main actors and the guest stars, or the guest stars and the directors, or what have you. For whatever reason, there isn't much on this episode in here, so I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that. What I do have here is that Director McAveety remembered that although cast and crew remained professional and dedicated in all ways, the mood on the set was colored by the rumors in the air. He said that everybody felt that Star Trek was on its last legs. Nobody wanted it to be, but they felt it wasn't going to get picked up for another season. So at this point, when they were filming this is late in the second season, and the rumors were swirling that the show was getting canceled. And this was pretty much it. But no one held back a fraction of a percent. William Shatner, in particular, had quite a workout in the Omega Glory, including numerous wrestling matches with Morgan Woodward, who was 6'3", and Roy Jensen, who was a hefty 6'2". Underneath McAveety's excellent direction, the fights are superb. In addition, and adding to the overall gritty feel of the Omega Glory, the set designs, lighting, and photography are all above average. I don't know about that. Are they above average? I mean, I don't see anything particularly impressive about the sets in this one. Like the jail, the jail just looks like some random jail from a Western. It doesn't look any particularly impressive to me. I mean, it could be a set. It could be a jail set from Land of the Lost or something, for all I know. McAveety said, quote, "I thought it was Bill's best performance, at least in the episode that I had, particularly when he read the Constitution. That was an incredible reading, and I felt that episode was very, very exceptional with the writing and the whole thing." I will agree with that. I do think that Shatner takes some lines that could have been, they are kind of corny, maybe, but I think he actually handles them pretty well. I think he actually handles it very deftly. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union. All right. The mixed impressions that dogged the Omega Glory from its inception did not end with the filming. As told by Robert Justman and Herbert Solo in Inside Star Trek The Real Story, James Ballas, the editor who had been assigned this episode, was standing at the bar next to William Shatner during the Star Trek Christmas party in December of 1967. As both men waited for their drinks, and it appears that Ballas may have already had a few drinks, the editor then volunteered his opinions on the episode of Omega Glory, as well as on Shatner's acting. Witnesses remember Ballast telling Shatner that Glory was, quote, a real turkey, adding that Shatner's choices as an actor did not help the editors. Quote, you always telegraph your reactions, and in this episode, it's more of a problem than ever, Ballast allegedly said, then added, quote, it doesn't make my job any easier because they're so damn hard to cut around. The camera doesn't lie, you know, unquote. An argument followed, and Shatner later shared with Roddenberry that the editor assigned to Glory thought that the material, written by Roddenberry himself, of course, was lacking in quality. Surprisingly, Ballast did not finish editing this episode, and he would not work for Star Trek again. Yeah, big surprise. Basically telling the star of the show and the showrunner that their work sucks. But again, he was probably, as they say, probably had a few drinks in him, and again, he probably thought that this was the final episode, and it was pretty much all over anyway. So maybe he felt emboldened to say that. Okay, so this was the last of the 9 episodes to be produced by John Meredith Lucas. His association with Star Trek, however, was not over. Lucas would return to the series in the 3rd season as both a writer and a director. Some notes on this. So Roy Jensen, Cloud William here, his voice was electronically altered. It was deepened and slowed down for this episode. In the preview trailer, you hear his voice unaltered. Here's another thing. Let me go back here. I think I didn't get a good image of it, unfortunately. So after Spock nerve pinches her, Syrah, she collapses. Now, this sort of skin that she's wearing, it kind of leaves a lot of her midriff bare, right? So, of course, as is kind of famously known back in those days, they didn't allow navels to be shown on broadcast television. Of course, the most famous example being Barbara Eden on I Dream of Jeannie. Now, if you can see, this kind of covers her navel. It's high up enough on her hips that you can't see her navel. But when she played dead or played unconscious and fell down, her navel became visible. And so you see her and her navel is visible, and then they cut away from her to like the other actors. Then later they cut back to her, and when they cut back to her, her hand is conveniently on her abdomen covering her navel in order to get past, I guess, broadcast standards. Okay, now Harvey Lynn and Kellum DeForest usually made sure that the scientific information on Star Trek was accurate. But one wrong piece of information slipped by in this episode. McCoy states that a human being is 96% water. We now know that the actual figure is more about 60%. This was the last episode to credit Herb Solow as executive in charge of production. Solow's next employer would be MGM, where he served as vice president in charge of television production. Among the series he would oversee in 1969 included Medical Center, The Courtship of Eddie's Father, and then came Bronson. Okay, so Roddenberry was very proud of his script for the Omega Glory. He also believed that actor, director, editor, and cast had all excelled in their jobs, and this episode was something special. So on February 20th of 1968, he wrote to Jack Reynolds at Paramount Studios, who of course owns Star Trek now, right? Suggesting that the Omega Glory get a full-page ad in the trades a few days before its March 1st broadcast premiere. He wanted Paramount to push this episode for Emmy Award consideration. Reynolds politely said no. Undaunted, Roddenberry wrote to Stan Robertson at NBC, suggesting that Glory was just too good to waste as a late-season installment. He actually wanted it held back for the launch of Star Trek's 3rd season, if there was one. In an effort to get NBC to agree to a renewal a commitment. He wrote, quote, "One of the great problems of all shows is to have a smasheroo opening episode, and we've really got one here." Robertson's response was also a polite no. Then on February 26, Roddenberry again wrote to Robertson, stating that Robert Justman agreed that the episode was deserving of a bit of promotion, and that Robert Justman, who later said he didn't, this was the same Robert Justman who later said he didn't think much of Omega Glory. But Roddenberry pushed further, requesting that if NBC wasn't ready to commit to a third season, at least Robertson could use his influence at the network to arrange for some on-air promo spots. But after the first season, NBC never did any on-air promos for Star Trek again. And again, Robertson's response was a polite no. That very same day, though, Roddenberry sent a letter to Hank Grant at the Hollywood Reporter. Quote, many think the Omega Glory is a unique piece of entertainment, he told the columnist in hope of getting some free press. I'm not sure who Minnie is. I guess Minnie translate to Majel and I. I don't know. But anyway, again, or actually in this case, Grant didn't even bother to respond. He didn't even bother answering Roddenberry. Determined to shine a spotlight on what he felt was one of Star Trek's best episodes, Roddenberry struck a deal with the GAF Corporation or GAF Corporation to release the Omega Glory as a Viewmaster 3D disc set. You remember those, right? The Viewmasters? If you were a kid in the 60s or 70s, I'm sure you do. This was the first of 5 Star Trek programs and the only one from the original series to be adapted onto Viewmaster. Hold on a moment. All right. So the ratings for this episode were not good. It aired on March 1st, 1968. And in the first half hour, it was third in the ratings. Now, they don't have the audience share, but they give the raw numbers. It had 11,140,000 households watching. It was third behind Operation Entertainment on ABC, which had 12,660,000 watching, and third behind Gomer Pyle, which had 16,020,000 watching. And it was third again in the second half hour, and we have the audience share there. It had a 26.2% audience share, which was third behind ABC with 27.7 and CBS with 32.4. For those who were watching the Omega Glory, this story of East versus West struck a chord due to its unintentional timing. This patriotic but thoughtful piece of propaganda aired immediately following the month-long February Tet Offensive, the most bloody period for American servicemen in the Vietnam War, where over 80,000 communist troops struck more than 100 towns and cities in the largest military operation yet conducted by either side. All right, now, following the broadcast of Omega Glory, there was a letter that was written to NBC. I'm sure there were many, but they have this letter here. Quote, please, Mr. Roddenberry, don't let Star Trek become another run-of-the-grade B type of science fiction show. There have been some unhappy signs of this, and we are concerned. Why must we be bombarded by planets identical with Earth except for one little thing? This was handled very cleverly in A Piece of the Action, but elsewhere it has varied between disappointment and utterly poor. We both nearly turned off the Omega Glory in the middle of it. Please bring back your original standards and write another menagerie and let the Omega be passed. If we fans have any voice in the creation of Star Trek, then we say keep it the way it was, and that is what we want. I'm sure Roddenberry loved that letter. Herb Solow called this a less than mediocre episode. William Shatner said, quote, "The Omega Glory had a history of rejection, but there was no keeping a mediocre script down. It does have some fascinating political commentaries for its time and some excellent action sequences." Dorothy Fontana said, quote, "This was Roddenberry all the way. I didn't think it was our best episode. However, I always did like the speech that Kirk says about the words, about the Declaration of Independence. We the People was really a great speech, and Bill delivered it well." Vincent McAveety said, "I love that show. I thought that was something very special." Oh, so Roddenberry isn't the only one who liked it. Roy Jensen said, "The Omega Glory was a pleasure to do. Bill Shatner was a real gentleman and a profound pro. And of course, at that time, Star Trek was one of the best shows on the air." Gene Roddenberry said, quote, "Next to the first pilot," and that would be The Cage, "and the two-part The Menagerie, I suppose that may have been the one I was the most pleased with, where I had taken a writing credit. Of course, there had been others where I did most of the writing but did not list my name, and there may have been some episodes I thought turned out better, such as the first Romulan one. But the Omega Glory I was pleased with, even if others don't see it that way." All right. And that'll do it for the Omega Glory. So next week, I'll be back with another Trek Talk, and I'll be covering episode 55, Assignment Earth. And this was the final episode of the second season. Now, as I've said before, so I'll do that next week. I'll cover that episode. Now, the week after that, I'll be with my National Guard unit. So I'm not going to have a Trek Talk the week after that. So it'll be 2 weeks before I come back, and I'll do I'm not going to cover an episode, but I'll do basically a kind of review and retrospective on the second season, and I'll also probably do a tier rankings of the episodes in the second season. And let's see, and then I'll probably do another live stream this Sunday, and I hope to have, oh, and I haven't mentioned it, so my latest video, which I put out this past weekend, was top 5 Marvel villains for Green Lantern. I hope you'll check that out if you haven't already. Oh, and please do like the stream if you haven't already, and sub to the channel if you would. And I hope to have another video, top 5 Marvel villains for Aquaman, out by next week. And yeah, so that will be it for now. Thank you to those who tuned in during the stream and those who will catch the stream on a rewatch. Oh, thank you, Jay Rocker. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I will see you folks next week. Until then, have a good evening.